You have spent so much time trying to understand what went wrong, replaying conversations in your head, wondering where you lost your footing, and asking yourself why your best efforts never seemed to be enough. That exhaustion is real, and it is not something you imagined. It comes from carrying the emotional weight of a relationship that was never designed to be balanced. You kept showing up with honesty, with patience, with a willingness to adjust, only to find that your adjustments were met with new expectations, new criticisms, and a quiet but steady erosion of your confidence. If you feel drained, confused, or emotionally tangled, it is not because you failed. It is because you were operating in a space where the rules kept changing, and you were expected to carry the blame for every shift. That kind of emotional fatigue does not come from weakness. It comes from trying to apply normal relationship logic to a dynamic that was never running on normal terms. The first truth you need to hold on to is simple. You were not the problem. The confusion you experienced was not a reflection of your inadequacy. It was the natural result of interacting with a pattern of emotional control that thrives on ambiguity. When someone operates from a place of deep-seated insecurity masked as superiority, they cannot tolerate a relationship that functions on equal footing. Equality feels like a threat. Consistency feels like a loss of leverage. So instead of building trust, they build dependency. Instead of clear communication, they create emotional fog. You were not meant to solve this. You were meant to survive it long enough to see it clearly. And seeing it clearly is the exact moment where healing begins. To understand how to set firm limits, you first need to understand the psychological engine driving the behavior. At its core, this dynamic runs on emotional boundary erosion. It is not about occasional disagreements or normal relationship friction. It is about a systematic process where your limits are treated as negotiable, your needs are reframed as demands, and your push for fairness is painted as selfishness. This happens because the underlying psychology is not built on mutual respect. It is built on control. Control, in this context, is not always loud or aggressive. Often it is quiet, persistent, and deeply ingrained in everyday interactions. It shows up in how questions are answered, how silence is used, how apologies are extracted, and how your reality is slowly replaced with a version that serves their emotional comfort. When you recognize that this is not a personal failure, but a structural pattern, the path forward stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like a process of reclamation. The first pattern you will notice is the constant testing of your boundaries. You will set a limit, maybe around your time, your emotional energy, or the way you expect to be spoken to, and within days, it will be challenged. Sometimes it is framed as a joke. Sometimes it is framed as an overreaction on your part. Sometimes it is simply ignored, with the expectation that you will forget or give in to keep the peace. This is not accidental. The psychology behind it is straightforward. A person who relies on emotional control cannot afford to accept a firm limit because it represents a loss of influence. To them, your boundary is not a statement of self-respect. It is a direct challenge to their authority in the relationship. When they push against it, they are not trying to understand you. They are trying to see if the boundary is real, or if it is just another line they can cross without consequence. The effect on you is gradual. You start second-guessing your own clarity. You begin apologizing for asking for basic respect. You convince yourself that if you just explain it one more time, they will finally get it. But explanation does not fix a dynamic that benefits from confusion. Recognition does. The second pattern is the use of guilt and role reversal. The moment you hold a line, the emotional temperature shifts. Suddenly, you are the one causing tension. Suddenly, you are the one withholding love, being cold, or being unreasonable. This is a well-documented psychological maneuver. When accountability feels threatening, the mind deflects it by projecting it onto the nearest available target. In this dynamic, that target is you. Your healthy limit becomes framed as emotional abandonment. Your need for consistency becomes framed as rigidity. Your refusal to tolerate disrespect becomes framed as a lack of care. This reversal is designed to make you question your own motives. It pulls you out of your center and puts you on the defensive. Once you are defending yourself, you are no longer enforcing your boundary. You are negotiating your worth. The emotional cost is heavy. You start carrying guilt for things you should never have been guilty of. You start apologizing for existing with needs. You lose touch with your own internal compass because you are too busy managing someone else's emotional narrative. Understanding this pattern is not about labeling or demonizing. It is about recognizing a mechanism. Once you see the mechanism, you stop feeding it. The third pattern is the cycle of intermittent reinforcement. You will notice periods of intense warmth, followed by withdrawal, followed by charm, followed by criticism, followed by silence, followed by sudden affection. This is not random moodiness. It is a psychological structure that creates dependency. The human brain is wired to seek consistency, but when consistency is replaced with unpredictable rewards, the mind becomes hyper-focused on restoring the positive state. You start working harder, adjusting more, tolerating more, hoping to trigger the version of the person that feels safe. This cycle is deeply disorienting. It keeps you emotionally tethered long after logic tells you to step away. It creates a bond that feels like love, but operates like obligation. The effect on your nervous system is measurable. You stay in a state of low-grade alertness, scanning for shifts, bracing for tension, and mistaking relief for connection. Breaking this cycle does not require dramatic confrontation. It requires emotional distance. It requires you to stop chasing consistency from a source that thrives on inconsistency. When you stop reacting to the highs and lows, the cycle loses its power. You need to hear this clearly, because it will be repeated in different ways throughout your healing. You are not responsible for managing another person's emotional regulation. You are not obligated to absorb discomfort so someone else can avoid accountability. Setting a limit is not an act of aggression. It is an act of self-preservation. Clarity does not come from endless conversation. It comes from consistent action. You do not need permission to protect your peace. You do not need validation to walk away from what drains you. These truths are not meant to sound harsh. They are meant to sound steady. They are meant to anchor you when the noise returns. Awareness begins when you stop trying to decode every interaction and start observing the pattern as a whole. You do not need to analyze every text, every comment, every shift in tone. You need to step back and look at the trajectory. Ask yourself simple questions. Do I feel smaller after we speak? Do I constantly modify my behavior to avoid conflict? Do I apologize for stating a basic need? Do I feel responsible for their emotional state? If the answers align, you already have your clarity. You do not need to convince them of the pattern. You only need to acknowledge it for yourself. Once you acknowledge it, you stop arguing with reality. You start aligning your actions with what you now know to be true. This is not cynicism. This is emotional maturity. It is the quiet recognition that some dynamics cannot be fixed through effort alone, because the effort is being used against you. From awareness, you move into emotional detachment. This does not mean becoming cold or indifferent. It means removing your nervous system from the cycle. It means choosing not to engage in conversations that go nowhere. It means refusing to justify your boundaries to someone who is committed to misunderstanding them. You do this by speaking less, observing more, and allowing silence to do the work that arguments never could. When you stop trying to prove your point, you reclaim your energy. When you stop defending your reality, you protect your clarity. Detachment is not a punishment. It is a reset. It gives you the space to remember who you were before the confusion began. It reminds you that your worth was never tied to their approval, and your peace was never supposed to be negotiated. Setting firm limits requires a shift in how you communicate. You no longer explain, justify, or over-contextualize. You state what you need, what you will allow, and what will happen if the line is crossed. You keep your language simple, direct, and free of emotional charge. You do not raise your voice, you do not threaten, you do not beg. You state your position, and you let your actions enforce it. If someone tells you they are too busy to respect your time, you adjust your availability. If someone dismisses your feelings, you step back from emotional sharing. If someone tries to pull you back into an old pattern, you do not re-engage. You do not argue the past. You do not debate the present. You simply hold the line. The power is not in the words. The power is in the consistency behind them. When your actions match your statements, the boundary becomes real. When your actions contradict your statements, the boundary becomes a suggestion. You are building a new standard, not just for them, but for yourself. This process will trigger resistance. It always does. When you stop playing the old role, the other person will try to pull you back into it. They may escalate. They may withdraw. They may test you again, harder this time, to see if you will crack. This is not a sign that you are doing it wrong. It is a sign that you are doing it right. The system is responding to the loss of control. Your job is not to manage their reaction. Your job is to maintain your position. You do this by staying calm, by refusing to be drawn into emotional debates, by protecting your time and your attention. You do not need to win the argument. You only need to win your peace. Peace is not found in being understood by the person who benefited from misunderstanding you. Peace is found in understanding yourself and refusing to abandon that understanding for temporary relief. You will notice that the more you hold your ground, the quieter the noise becomes. Not because they suddenly change, but because you stop feeding the dynamic. You stop offering your energy to a system that consumes it. You stop measuring your worth by their responses. You start measuring it by your own consistency. This is where self-respect becomes a practice, not just a concept. Self-respect is what remains when you stop negotiating with bad faith. It is what grows when you choose your well-being over the illusion of harmony. It is what steadies you when the old patterns try to resurface. You do not need to become someone else to survive this. You only need to return to the person you were before the exhaustion set in. The person who knew their limits, who trusted their intuition, who did not apologize for taking up space. Healing is not a single moment. It is a series of small, deliberate choices. It is choosing not to reply to a message designed to pull you back in. It is choosing to rest instead of ruminating. It is choosing to speak your truth without expecting it to be received perfectly. It is choosing to protect your mornings, your evenings, your quiet moments from people who treat your presence as a resource rather than a relationship. This is not about building walls. It is about building standards. Walls keep everyone out. Standards let the right people in and keep the draining dynamics at a distance. You are allowed to be selective with your energy. You are allowed to require basic respect as a condition of your presence. You are allowed to walk away from what diminishes you without carrying the weight of someone else's disappointment. As you continue forward, you will find that your mind becomes clearer. The constant mental loops begin to quiet down. You stop rehearsing conversations that will never happen. You stop searching for closure from the person who cannot give it. You realize that closure does not come from an apology you may never receive. It comes from the moment you decide that your peace is no longer conditional on their behavior. That decision is quiet, but it is powerful. It shifts your focus from what you cannot control to what you absolutely can. You control your attention. You control your responses. You control the space you allow others to occupy in your life. When you take ownership of those things, the dynamic loses its grip. You are no longer reacting. You are directing. There will be days when the old feelings resurface: doubt, guilt, the urge to reach out, the hope that things might be different this time. This is normal. It does not mean you are failing. It means you are human, and your nervous system is adjusting to a new baseline. Acknowledge the feeling without acting on it. Remind yourself why you set the limit in the first place. Remind yourself of the exhaustion, the confusion, the quiet erosion of your confidence. Then remind yourself of what you are choosing instead. Clarity, calm, self-respect. You do not have to be perfect. You only have to be consistent. Every time you choose yourself over the old pattern, you strengthen your foundation. Every time you refuse to re-enter a cycle that drains you, you prove to yourself that you are capable of change. Moving forward does not require you to forget what happened. It requires you to stop letting it dictate your present. You carry the lessons, not the weight. You acknowledge the experience, but you do not let it define your capacity for trust, for love, for peace. You learn to recognize the early signs of imbalance, not with fear, but with clarity. You learn to speak your needs without apology. You learn to walk away without looking back for validation. This is how you stay strong, not by hardening your heart, but by protecting it. Not by shutting down, but by choosing where to open up. Not by fighting the past, but by building a present that reflects your true worth. You have already done the hardest part. You saw through the confusion. You recognized the pattern. You decided that your peace matters more than the illusion of control. That decision is enough. From here, you move at your own pace. You protect your energy. You speak with clarity. You act with consistency. You do not need to prove anything to anyone. You only need to remain aligned with the truth you now know. The truth that you were never the problem. The truth that limits are not cruel, they are necessary. The truth that healing is not about becoming untouchable, but about becoming intentional. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to set standards. You are allowed to walk away from what drains you and walk toward what sustains you. This is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of your clarity. Stay grounded. Stay consistent. Stay strong. Your peace is waiting, and it is entirely yours to keep.